The paranoia started small. A phone call that was answered before it rang, a door to a safe house that was slightly ajar when it should have been locked, a stranger on the street who made eye contact for exactly half a second too long. Agent Venom had spent 22 years learning to recognize the subtle signs of surveillance, the microscopic tells that indicated someone was watching, the minute behavioral patterns that revealed deception. And now every sign pointed to one inescapable conclusion: he was being hunted by his own government. The intelligence community had turned against him. The organization he'd served for more than 2 decades had decided he was a liability that needed to be eliminated. If you could feel the machinery of your own destruction closing in around you, would you run or would you stand and fight? The realization had begun 3 months ago during a routine operational review. Venom had been assigned to analyze intelligence reports from a series of field operations conducted by operatives under his direct supervision. What he'd discovered was systematic falsification of intelligence. What he'd discovered was field teams fabricating evidence. What he'd discovered was the entire intelligence hierarchy deliberately misrepresenting facts to justify military interventions that had no legitimate strategic purpose. But the discovery wasn't supposed to happen. The discovery wasn't supposed to occur until after Venom had been eliminated. The machinery of government had calculated that Venom would be dead before he could access the classified files that would reveal the systematic corruption. But Venom had survived longer than expected. Venom had proved more resilient than the hunters had anticipated. And now Venom had evidence of the corruption, and the hunters had to mobilize their contingencies. The first sign came when Venom's apartment was broken into while he was at work. Nothing was stolen, no files were removed, no classified documents were taken. The burglary was designed to send a message: "We know where you live, we can reach you anytime, you are not safe anywhere." The second sign came when Venom received a phone call from his sister. His sister lived in Boston under her maiden name. His sister maintained no contact with intelligence community circles. His sister had no reason to expect a phone call from a man claiming to be her brother's colleague. But the phone call happened anyway, and the man on the phone told her something she wasn't supposed to know: that Venom had accessed classified files related to Operation Yellowstone. The third sign came when Venom's ex-wife called him, terrified, asking why federal agents had appeared at her house asking questions about him. The federal agents claimed Venom was a security risk. The federal agents claimed Venom had stolen classified information. The federal agents claimed Venom was working with a foreign intelligence service. The machinery of character assassination was being deployed. They were constructing a narrative that would make Venom a traitor, a spy, someone who'd betrayed his country. They were building a case that would justify his elimination. They were manufacturing evidence that would explain his disappearance or his death as justified prosecution of a security threat. Venom had hours, maybe days, before the hunters moved in for the final elimination. He needed to secure the evidence. He needed to transfer the documentation to someone outside the intelligence community. He needed to ensure that the truth survived, even if he didn't. But everyone he'd known in the intelligence community was potentially compromised. Every contact was potentially a hunter. Every relationship he'd built over 22 years was potentially a trap designed to locate him and eliminate him. Would you know which of your closest friends had been turned into instruments of your own destruction? Venom went dark at 14:33 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. He left his apartment with nothing but the clothes he was wearing and a flash drive containing the evidence of government corruption. He abandoned his official identity. He abandoned his government-issued phone. He abandoned the entire life he'd constructed over 22 years. The paranoia became absolute and all-consuming. Every person on the street could be an undercover operative. Every car that stayed on the same road for more than a few turns could be a surveillance team. Every security camera was potentially feeding his image directly to intelligence community facial recognition systems. Every decision he made could be anticipated, countered, used against him by people who'd been trained in the same techniques that had trained him. He spent the first night in a cheap motel in Arlington, paying cash for a room under a false name. He didn't sleep. He sat in the dark and watched the parking lot through a gap in the curtains, waiting for the moment when the hunters would move in and eliminate him. The moment didn't come. Instead, he watched as a van pulled into the parking lot and remained there for 47 minutes before leaving. The van could have been surveillance. The van could have been hunters. The van could have been an innocent family going to visit someone. The paranoia didn't allow for the possibility that it was innocent. By day 3 of being dark, Venom had lost the ability to distinguish between genuine threats and paranoid projection. He'd stopped going to public places where cameras could capture his image. He'd stopped using any form of communication that could be traced or monitored. He'd become a phantom, existing only in the shadows, surviving on cash and false identities, moving through a landscape that had become completely hostile. He made contact with journalist Sarah Winters through an encrypted message routed through multiple VPNs and anonymity networks. Winters had spent 15 years breaking stories about intelligence agency corruption. Winters had published classified information that brought down careers and ended operations. Winters was one of the few people outside the intelligence community who Venom thought might still be trustworthy. "I have evidence of systematic intelligence corruption," Venom wrote. "Evidence that senior government officials have been deliberately falsifying intelligence reports to justify military interventions. Evidence that the intelligence community has become a mechanism for corporate profit extraction disguised as national security." Winter's response came within 20 minutes. "Meet me, somewhere public, somewhere crowded, somewhere with multiple exits." The meeting was arranged for the following evening at Union Station in Washington, D.C. Venom would transfer the flash drive containing the evidence. Winters would take the documentation to her editor. Within 48 hours, the story would be published. Within 72 hours, the machinery of government would be forced to respond. But Venom was certain the hunters would be waiting at Union Station. Venom was certain they'd anticipate the dead drop. Venom was certain they'd set a trap that would close around him the moment he made contact with Winters. He went to Union Station anyway, because the alternative was allowing the corruption to continue, allowing the machinery of false intelligence to continue driving military interventions, allowing the machinery of institutional betrayal to continue unopposed. The station was crowded, thousands of people moving through the main hall, taking escalators, boarding trains, existing in a state of ordinary human chaos. Venom moved through the crowd like a ghost, his face buried in his collar, his eyes constantly scanning for surveillance operatives, for tactical teams, for the hunters who were supposedly closing in around him. He made the transfer to Winters in exactly 3 seconds, hand to hand. Flash drive moved from Venom's pocket to Winters' hand. No words, no acknowledgement, just a moment of human contact that could have been interpreted as accidental contact between two strangers in a crowded station. The federal agents moved in 30 seconds later. They came from multiple directions simultaneously, a coordinated tactical movement designed to cut off all escape routes. Venom saw them and understood immediately that his paranoia had been justified. They'd been waiting, they'd been watching, they'd anticipated the dead drop and positioned themselves accordingly. Venom ran. He moved through the crowd with a desperation born from the knowledge that capture meant execution. He knew these tactics. He knew these operatives. He knew that once they had him in custody, he would disappear. He would be interrogated in a black site facility. He would be eliminated, and his death would be attributed to some accident or some classified operation that nobody would ever investigate. He made it to the train platform. A train was departing for Philadelphia. He threw himself through the closing doors as federal agents reached for him. The train began to move. The federal agents were left on the platform, watching as Venom disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel beneath Washington, D.C. But the paranoia intensified. The train was a confined space. There was no escape. There were only two exits, the front and the rear. Federal agents could board the train at the next stop. Federal agents could trap him in the metal coffin of the train car. Federal agents could execute him in front of civilian passengers. If you were being hunted by the most powerful intelligence apparatus on Earth, would you believe escape was possible, or would you accept that death was inevitable? Venom moved to the rear of the train and climbed out through an emergency exit onto the coupling between cars. The train was moving at 40 miles per hour. He jumped from the coupling into the darkness, rolling through brush along the tracks, his body slamming against concrete barriers. He felt ribs crack. He felt blood pouring from a gash in his head. He felt the absolute certainty that he'd just made a catastrophic error. But he was alive. He was off the train. He was moving through the suburban landscape north of Washington, D.C., bleeding and injured, but alive. He stumbled into a hospital emergency room at 23:47 p.m. The triage nurse asked about his injuries. Venom gave her a false name. The hospital staff treated him without asking too many questions, but as Venom sat in the hospital bed, he knew it was only a matter of time before his false identity was flagged in law enforcement databases. The hunters would know he'd gone to the hospital. The hunters would triangulate his location. The hunters would close in for the final elimination. But before they could move in, news began breaking on the hospital's television. David Winter's publication had released the evidence. The story about intelligence agency corruption was spreading across the internet. Federal officials were being questioned. Congressional committees were launching investigations. The Venom files had escaped. The evidence had survived. The truth was now public property. The federal agents who showed up at the hospital approximately 1 hour later came with a different objective. Instead of executing him, they arrested him on charges of violating the Espionage Act and theft of classified information. The arrest warrant was legitimate. The charges were real, but the arrest also meant Venom would live. Venom would stand trial. Venom would have the opportunity to testify publicly about what he'd discovered. As Venom was being led away from the hospital in handcuffs, he caught a glimpse of the television. He saw federal prosecutors announcing an investigation into intelligence agency corruption. He saw congressional leaders demanding accountability. He saw the machinery of institutional response beginning to mobilize against the corruption that had consumed his life. He had exposed the truth. The truth had survived. The paranoia that had consumed him during those 3 days of being dark had been justified. The hunters were real. The threat was absolute. And his decision to transfer the evidence to Winters saved his life, because public exposure was the only protection against assassination. The paranoia didn't disappear after his arrest. The paranoia became permanent. Venom spent the remainder of his life wondering which guards had been assigned to protect him and which guards had been assigned to eliminate him. He spent the remainder of his life examining every meal for poison. He spent the remainder of his life unable to trust that another human being wasn't working for the intelligence agencies that wanted him dead.
But the evidence had survived, the corruption had been exposed, the machinery of institutional accountability had been activated, and Venom had learned the ultimate lesson. Paranoia isn't a mental illness when the people around you are actually working to destroy you. Paranoia is the only rational response.